Thanks so much for coming tonight. My name is Katie. I'm part of the consultant team supporting the city. And this is our third public meeting for the Edmonds Waterfront Access Study. The purpose of our meeting tonight is to share information with you about our work to date. And that includes screening all of the concepts that we showed you at our last meeting through our level 1 screening process, and showing you the preliminary alternatives that will go through our next step, which is the level 2 evaluation process. And at the end, we'll have time for questions and then plenty of opportunity for you to provide comments through a couple different forums that we have here, and I'll explain those a little bit later as well. And just a quick run through of the agenda before we get started in our presentation. Phil Williams with the city is here, and he'll give you a little bit of the background about why we're here and why we're doing this study. And then Rick Schaefer from the consultant team with Tetra Tech, he will provide some detailed information about the work that the technical team has done so far in this project. Followed by the presentation, which we think will take about 20 to 25 minutes. We'll have 20 minutes for a facilitated question and answer session. And I'll get back up here and run through that with you and explain how that's going to work. And at about 7 o'clock, we'll break from this presentation and question and answer session into more of an open house style where you can speak individually with members of the project team and folks from the city as well. And with that, let's turn it over to Phil.
Thank you. Good evening. Phil Williams, Public Works and Utilities Director. Katie is very organized, and I'm sure you'll notice that, so I'm going to be very short, and we'll try to stay on schedule tonight. I did want to introduce some of the people that are here. There's quite a few staff, and there's several members of the task force itself, and that is the Mayor's Task Force on Alternatives Analysis that are looking at these issues down the waterfront. In the back, we see two of them. There's Jim Orvis on the right, who's with the Port of Bremerton on their board. What did I say, Port of Bremerton? Yeah, I used to work there. That comes back once in a while, not very often. He may be with the Port of Bremerton too, but he's with the Port of Edmonds. Yeah, sorry about that. And Mike Nelson with the Edmonds City Council. See Farrell Fleming from the Senior Center, but he's not on the board. In the back, we have Rob English, who's our city engineer. And he and I and Bertrand, where are you at? There, no, he's sitting down. Bertrand House is the city's transportation engineer. We sort of form the staff for the task force. Let's see, other members that we have. Ian Sterling with the Washington State Department of Transportation, yes. He's here representing all aspects of DOT tonight, but members on the task force have been Lynn Griffiths, who's the head of the Ferries Division for DOT, as well as Lorena Eng, who's the regional manager at the regional office here for DOT. So a lot of involvement from the state. We have, the railroad has a representative on this task force. Rick Wagner, who's not here tonight. Oh, he just walked in, sorry. Hi, Rick. Rick is with the Burlington Road and South. Yeah, there you go. Sorry. I was looking for you earlier. And it's very important, obviously, that we have the railroad being an intimate part of this process. It's their property, it's their railroad, and anything that we do is going to have to be approvable and approved by the railroad. So why are we doing this? Well, I think all of you in this room, if you came tonight, probably understand the basic problem. We have trains that come through Edmonds on the Burlington Northern Track, which basically cleaves off a section of Edmonds on the waterfront that has, you know, a 700 slip marina, a senior center, a dive park, 2 other city parks, restaurants. There's some residential over there, and anytime a train comes through, there's a blockage and you can't get across the tracks, and that includes emergency vehicles. It gets really acute when something goes wrong, perhaps. The train has to stop in an emergency, blocking both tracks. If it's a freight train, that's typically what would result. You'd end up with both Dayton and Main blocked at the same time, and then we've got you know, a real mess on our hands. And that's happened since I've been here. I've been in Edmonds 6 years, and I can remember, I think, 4 occasions or 5 occasions when that has happened, and it's a real inconvenience, not to mention a real hazard when you've got emergency responders on one side of the tracks and needs on the other. So we're looking for ideas. We went out and vetted this with the public twice now, seeing what ideas you had to solve these problems. We ended up with, what, 48 of them? I think there were 40.
With variance, we got up to 51.
Okay, 51, we'll say that. We started with 51 ideas that could be pursued, and as Katie pointed out, we've now whittled it down to a smaller number. We'll spend more time on those, and then at that point, try to screen it down further to alternatives that we want to continue to look at. And that's what the evening will be about. And with that, I think I'll introduce Rick Schaefer, who's the head of he's the project manager for the Tetra Tech team that the city has engaged and hired to help us work through this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Well, we're back. A lot of familiar faces here. I think Phil got things started out pretty good. I'm just going to kind of jump into it here. So, talked about the different members of the task force. Key thing is it engages those transportation agencies that have facilities that all seem to converge right here in our waterfront, which is a great opportunity in terms of intermodal connections and trying to make that all work. But it's when you get down into the thick of it all, that's where we're seeing problems that Phil just talked about. Talked about, I'm going to drop this side, I'll just go right to there. Four main purposes or needs that we've identified for this study. One is emergency response. Phil talked about that situation. Getting cars back and forth off of the boats at the ferry terminal. Pedestrians, general traffic, bicyclists here, the local traffic needing to be able to get across those tracks as well. And then the intermodal connections. People coming off the ferry, getting on the sounder, community transit circulating through as well, and having safe and efficient means by which those people can make those connections through there. So, our last meeting, we were approached a couple of times by members of the community wanting a little information to kind of quantify what the problems are dealing with the trains. And we came across, we were going to go out and videotape a couple of weeks at the crossing. And we uncovered existing tape that was taken in the middle of June 2012. And it's 24/7 video of the Main Street crossing. And so I and an intern tediously went through that footage and documented what was going on every time a train came through. And this kind of just summarizes it. Over those 2 weeks, we averaged between 37 and 38 gate closures a day at Main Street. The average total closure time is 80 minutes a day. And the average closure time was a little over 2 minutes. And when the unit trains come by, that's the coal trains, they're obviously a bit longer. And some of you probably watched those go by. Almost 4 minutes. But the other thing was, we looked at the delays in all four directions, coming out of the park, coming off the dock, coming from Railroad, or coming from Main Street. And you can see we have every day an average of 709 vehicles delayed. Times, you take that number of vehicles times the amount of delay, and you're looking at almost 29 hours of vehicle delay time. Pedestrians, 115 pedestrians a day, and almost 5 person hours. And over 10, between 10 and 11 ferry loadings or offloadings were delayed, interrupted, or just delayed from starting by the trains going by. So on top of that, we had about 10 or 11 people a day running under the gates as they were closing, or around them when they were closed. So there's an obvious safety issue there as well. This was 2012. The economy was still down. Still hasn't picked up in some places, but there's more traffic out there now. There are more cars out there now. There's more trains out there now. And so today's situation is probably a little more dramatic than what we have here. Okay. The other side of it is emergency response. We'll hear about that. This is data from about 4.5 years, ending early December last year. They changed systems at the fire district, so we're having trouble getting data on calls since then, but there were 277 calls in that period to the west side of the tracks. Most of them were 8-car calls, the vast majority. 64, that's almost a quarter of them, have response times of over 7 minutes. Okay, and you can see their normal response time is here in about the 5-minute range, give or take. We don't have a lot of documentation. They don't necessarily record when a delay is caused by a train, but anecdotally from the district, yes, we hear this on the radio. We hear, oh, here, we're waiting for a train, we're waiting for a train. So the question is, what happens when you have a delayed response out here? Now you're raising the risk to whoever has the need on the other side of the tracks. Okay, I'm missing another slide. Okay, the other thing we looked at, though, when you go back to, we looked at during that period we were looking at the video, when do the gate closures come? And what we're finding is a peak in that distribution is about the same time of day as when we see a peak in emergency calls. Now, we're talking about 40 trains a day as opposed to 277 calls over 4.5 years. But you start seeing what's the nature of the traffic and what's the nature of the calls. You start seeing this coincidence, it raises the risk factor a little bit. So where are we right now? We're right in the middle of these 2 yellow panels, and those of you who have been online or been to the earlier open houses have seen this chart before. We have just completed our screening, the level 1 review of the different concepts, the 51 concepts. And we're just about to head into level 2. We formulated some alternatives based upon what came out of the alternative 1 screening, and we've shaped these alternatives, bringing those pieces that were rated highest out of level 1. And now we're moving forward to level 2, but before we get into an evaluation, we need to hear opinions, ideas, and see if we haven't baked these pies yet. So we still have time to reshape things a bit, take some good input, and see if we can tweak these a little bit and make them better. So as you recall, level 1, let's talk about what happened there. We have, like I said, we have a lot of different ideas from people from all over the place, alternatives ranging from far to the north to the east side of Lake Washington. I mean, I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased. People really pulled out the stops in terms of coming up with ideas. We let it flow, and it's good. We need to get it on the table, and we need to look at it. I wouldn't have thought of all of those. And so our team working in a vacuum would not have come up with what the community has been able to help us with. So very pleased with that. So then, like I said, we have 2 levels of screening here. We have this first level, and I have an old version of this. I don't know what happened. The version I have on there is the wrong one. But we're right here. We've just gone through this evaluation, and we're going to go into this level 2 evaluation. What comes out of this with the task force, we'll go to another open house. Then we'll take those recommendations to the mayor and to the council for consideration of action. Yeah, this was my work. This is an old version because this is the extent of what I can do graphically, folks. So you know I'm helped by some really great people. So 51 ideas to start with, okay? 13 of those ideas we're advancing and molded them into 11 preliminary alternatives that we have up here behind the screen. We'll do the big reveal here after the presentation. And there are 6 early recommendations. The task force said these are things that we need to pursue, but they're falling outside in a large part. They're falling outside either the mechanics of our study or the purpose and need, but there are things that we think the community should move forward with. So we'll talk about those in a little bit. These are the criteria. You folks had a chance to look at these and comment on them before that we used in level 1. We used a red, yellow, green type of criteria or rating system. Because we're screening so many, we wanted something visually that would tell us the story. Those ones in the box define the purpose and need for this project. The others, more 5, 6, and 7, have to do more with implementation. Things about feasibility, social or economic impacts, environmental effects. Okay. Here are the early recommendations the task force identified. Two of them were crosswalk improvements down at on the railroad at Main and at Dayton in order to enhance the safety and comfort of pedestrians and bicyclists moving across those intersections. And I'll just say, at Dayton, coming across from the south, there's no marked way to get from the south side of Dayton to the north side at that, anywhere around that intersection. So I feel the discomfort myself. The third one is one we call operational number 4, and that is for the city to pursue with the railroad a notification protocol from 911 to the railroad that if there's a call on the west side of the tracks, send a signal, stop the trains outside of Edmonds so they won't be interrupting emergency responders. That is something that will be explored with the railroad. Now that doesn't give us guaranteed access across the track, but it mitigates that risk. It's a near-term thing that we can pursue, and really no significant construction cost to it. And then there were several comments about emergency evacuation, safety on the waterfront, and they include things such as funding for first aid training for all workers on that side of the tracks to be able to give first response, an operational plan that's communicated for helipad operation in case someone needs to be evacuated, and then tsunami evacuation plan. There are a lot of other things that could be part of that effort, and I know a creative group like folks have been showing up to these meetings can help out with that. But obviously this would involve a different group of players. It would involve the hospital district, and I can't even remember the name now, but a lot of other folks. It would involve the fire district. It would involve police. It would involve a lot of other folks. So a little different forum, but these are things that task force felt had merit. So this is an example from the summary matrix of the different concepts. We have this just the overpass ones. As an example, we have them all on boards in the back. We also have a couple of notebooks back there at those center tables that have not only the matrices, but that summarize it, but also the individual 2-page sheets describing each of the concepts and how they were evaluated, how these different ratings were arrived at. And those are available for you to look at. They're also in the online open house. There's a PDF with all 96 pages. There are 48 of them, I think. We combined a few of them. But you can see the red, the yellow, the green. It kind of jumps out at you, and these blue checks here are those that were identified as continuing on into level 2, to be pushed into, molded into alternatives for level 2. Okay. Really sorry that we don't have the updated presentation. Okay, these are the general locations of these alternatives for level 2. And I'm going to just talk about them briefly. You'll have plenty of time to go ahead and look at them. They're all posted up here on the wall in detail. But we have alternatives in different locations, as you can see. We also have different crossings that are of different capacities. Some are just for pedestrian and bicycle. When it comes to emergency response, responders, if the way is blocked, they can run across to get to the other side. We don't have to be opening up, separating cars of trains and that kind of thing, which is not an acceptable practice. It's not what we need to rely on at all. So a couple of those, we have the pedestrian bicycle overpasses are here at, there's proposed at Main Street. That would connect from the ferry ramp over to the transit center. We have a mid-block, we call, kind of in the vicinity of the train station and the senior center. And then we have the second set of solutions which could handle bicycle, foot traffic, as well as like a cart, maybe a specialty cart for medics to use. That includes an underpass at Main Street as well, and you'll see that up there on the boards. We also have some that are identified that also take pedestrians, bicycles, and also 8 cars or fire trucks, but not general traffic. That allows us to keep an overpass or underpass narrower, and it's not such a large structure. And but it'd be available as a trail, all the time, except when an emergency vehicle needs to go through it. One of those is proposed over here from the old Unical site, landing on the west over toward the port. We have another one that comes off at grade at Sunset and Edmonds. Would go over the tracks and make a left and head down and drop into the north end of Brackett's Landing north. And then we have some larger solutions, which would be dealing with the ferry loading and offloading. And these are larger footprints. They're larger aerial structures or understructures. And one of those is to elevate basically on a ramp where the existing holding lanes are now and come over the tracks and drop down onto the ferry dock. And then another one is similar, except it would move the pavement sections around, push it in a little bit to the west. We'd reclaim the old holding lanes. This would allow you to build it while you're still operating the old lanes, and then drop it down onto the ferry dock. Another one would be located here, but it would be below grade. We would drive down into it after going through the toll booths, and then go under Main Street. Main Street would be reconstructed, go under the tracks, and come up before you hit the span for the trestle. And then finally, moving the ferry operations off of Main Street over toward Dayton Street. That would involve building a structure here in the Harbor Square area. That would be a relocated transit center on the first floor. It would be commuter parking for Sounder and other commuters. And then it would be the ferry holding lanes on the top with a new span and a new dock out here. Then we would reclaim the ferry dock to the holding lanes, toll plaza, and all that. That's a big change for the city of Edmonds. It's a lot of disturbance. It's also a lot of opportunity for redevelopment and urban design, which is another point we heard about several times in the first 2 meetings. Opportunities to improve the design in this area. So we have a variety of alternatives here, a variety in terms of what type of solution it is, where it is, what its capacity consists of. Okay. Well, this is going to be helpful because I don't have all my slides here. It's going to be shorter than I intended. We're using a little different rating system this time. It's a little more fine-grained, and within each of the criteria that we're going to be using in level 2, there are several subcomponents. And we'll be going through and rating the alternative under each of those subcomponents and then rolling them up to the overall alternative. We have 11 criteria this time, and the first 4 are very similar to what we had in level 1. That's because, again, they are the core purpose and need for the project. So we have reliable emergency response, we have ferry loading and unloading, we have other general traffic delays, and we have the connectivity between different modes of travel. These other 7 are dealing with impacts, costs, and other benefits of different alternatives. And so everything from funding and permittability, temporary construction impacts, longer-term environmental impacts. Does the alternative address sea level rise? Again, something else that was raised on a number of occasions in our first 2 meetings. Does it provide for emergency evacuation? Does it fit with urban design? Or create opportunities for that? And is it consistent, with current and future transportation operations? If it doesn't work for those people who are providing transportation, those agencies, it's essentially, it's really not functioning the way it has to, and it's going to be hard to get buy-in from all the providers. And when you're going to go out and try and implement a solution, you need that mutual support. It's not only essential to just making it happen, it's also something that's looked for when it comes to looking for funding. So we have the rest of this until 8 o'clock to talk with you, answer your questions, listen to your questions, more importantly. And again, we have the online open house, and you can also have email and other ways you can reach out to us at any time. We have hard copy comment forms in the back. These are all things you were going to talk about, isn't it? But I ran out of slides.
Hand over the mic.
Okay, I'll just give it over to you. Keep us correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. You'll need to stay up here. For the next 20 minutes, we'd like to do a facilitated question and answer session. And we've gone through a lot of information, and I know you're probably pretty eager to get up here and see the alternatives that we have displayed up on the wall. So we want to focus the question and answer session just on clarifying points from the presentation and information on what we're moving forward with as part of the study. I'm sure you all have a lot of comments and thoughts that you want to share with us as well. And I want to just make it clear that that's not part of the question and answer session, but there are many ways that you can provide your comments, and we do want to hear them. So there are 2 comment tables in the back. One of them you can sit down and write down your comments on the form that you were given when you came in. And behind that one, there are a few laptops set up, so if you prefer to type those comments out, we'd love to get those that way as well. There are flip charts in various locations around the room if you want to add notes and thoughts to that and build off of what others in the room are writing on those, that would be great. And if you prefer to digest the information at home and get your comments to us another time, you can do that through our online open house through May 23rd, which is sort of what Rick just said, but just to reinforce all of that. And so for the facilitated question and answer session, here's how this is going to work. If you have questions, I ask you to please raise your hands. I'll come around. Hannah's going to help me get folks in order to get the questions out. I'll call on each person one time, so I want to make sure we can get to everyone in the room if we're able to in the 20-minute. And then after we've heard from everyone, we can come back and do a second round of questions if there's still time. When I get to you, please ask your question, and then I'll repeat it into the microphone to make sure everyone can hear. I ask that you please be respectful of the time, so try and keep it brief and on topic. Avoid repeating questions that you've already heard others ask if you can, please. And try and avoid side conversations so we can make sure everyone's able to hear what each other's questions are and the responses that folks here will give. So I'll get to as many as we can in 20 minutes, and then we'll break and do the open house style discussion following that. Sir?
The blockage times that Rick has described has gotten longer over the years because of the lack of the second track south of Dayton through Woodway. And in the old days when we had both tracks, trains could go in both directions, but Burlington Northern Santa Fe has been abiding by the King County ordinance to give all the northbound trains the right-of-way to clear the grade crossings in King County, which then means that all the trains coming south are parked on the train tracks north of Casper's. And when the trains clear the grade crossings at Dayton and Main, then the Burlington Northern train going south gets to come through Edmonds, which has doubled the amount, almost doubled the amount of time with the blockage. So the question becomes, when is Burlington Northern going to commit to complete the second track south of Dayton?
The question is about Burlington Northern's timeline in completing a second track, and I think Rick Wagner, maybe you want to address this question?
It's been about 60 years since that slide.
What's your rush?
So, honestly, I don't know when it's scheduled. I know that we have 100% plans. We're ready to go whenever it is actually the company and Sounder, Sounder, I believe, paid for that, when they decide that the need is there. That's how what I understand. I'm not actually involved in planning for that, or really don't have any inside information.
Okay, and let's try and keep our questions focused on this study, if we may.
I noticed that our level 2 options all appear to be overpass, underpass. Have we abandoned the idea of simply putting a emergency responder substation on the west side and table everything else? Or are we now committed to, it's an overpass, underpass access solution?
Oh,
So the question, sorry, just to make sure everyone heard, the question is about whether we're still considering putting emergency response access on the other side of the tracks.
Yes, with these overpasses, particularly the pedestrian, bicycle capacity ones, being something that could be done sooner, that would also be part of that, where they would have equipment that they could then access on the other side. So that concept could be part and parcel of any of these alternatives. And so that is not, this is one of those examples where things are not completely baked yet. And it's a matter of, okay, so what would be involved with that? Combine that with these other types of overpasses or underpasses. Where could we site that so that's, you know, you get over the other side, now you got a long run. It's got to be something that's proximate. But even of itself, that could be done first if it's staffed. And then, staffing the station costs a lot of resources, I understand. But if then you put in an overpass to get to it, you wouldn't necessarily have to staff it all the time. And so that's one of these phased type solutions where we're looking for, and that's actually part of our charge, and I didn't mention that, we're charged with looking for near-term and longer-term solutions. And of course, no one wants to build something twice, so you look at something that can phase it. So, great question.
Question?
Yeah, you had mentioned that there's consideration of moving the ferry terminal to the Dayton area, Dayton Street area. And I know that in recent years there's been talk of moving the ferry terminal down to Pine Street. Is that off the table now, or is that the same geographic area you're considering?
So the question is whether we're considering moving the ferry terminal down to Pine Street still.
Ian, that falls in your court. Again, Ian with Washington State.
So I think you're referring to Edmonds Crossing. Several years ago, we went to the legislature and asked for money to do that project. That was turned down. So at this point in time, it's no longer in our long-range plan. We're developing a new long-range plan. Could it end up in there again? It's possible. I would say not probable, and the timeline for that is probably decades rather than years.
What was a little surprised on the first, level 1, that the absence of the criteria was cost. And I'm wondering if in this next one, the relative cost of each of these things will be not only considered, but made available to the public.
Question is about whether we'll evaluate the costs and make those publicly available for the next phase of work.
You're right in that cost wasn't explicitly listed in the level 1 criteria by itself. It was part of a criterion for feasibility. And if something looked like it was going to be very involved, either from a permitting perspective or a cost perspective, then it was identified as having challenges in that area. And so it was, but it's really kind of more of a hand wave in terms of looking at what do we think this would cost? And we didn't want to invest a lot of resources on that until we narrowed the field down to, the baker's dozen that we have right now.
Will that be done then in this?
Absolutely, that's one of the specific criteria under level 2. Thank you.
Sir, in the back?
I'm wondering about the automobile traffic, because right now a lot of the traffic goes down up Main Street as well and through the business corridor there. And I did not hear anything about that with your planning there. So if people want to go back that way, would it be difficult for them with these other alternatives? Just the impact of the traffic, one way versus both ways they have now.
So traffic that right now wants to, are you talking about traffic coming off the ferry or just traffic in general coming from the waterfront?
Either one, maybe.
Well, some of these, like the larger ones that are at Main Street, that ferry traffic would be directed away from Main Street, which would mean you would have to then probably make the left up Dayton, right? Okay, and so that introduces a question in terms of level of service from a traffic perspective. What might need to be added to that alternative in order to make it workable? So that we have a realistic estimate in terms of the scope of what's involved and what it's going to cost. So, yeah, and that's something we started looking at these alternatives for storing vehicles, and that's something that popped on our mind a few weeks ago as we were putting these together. Other traffic, on grade separation, local traffic typically would proceed at grade as it does now. It would still be subject to interruption by trains. None of these alternatives, I'll just throw it out there right now, none of these alternatives propose to take all vehicle traffic, at grade separated, either over or under the tracks. The footprint for that is just quite large, and with the limited space we have between the tracks and the shoreline, just not workable. So.
Any other questions?
I guess,
We get this gentleman in the back, and we'll come back to you.
thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
Has there been any consideration by the state or other people of just eliminating the Edmonds ferry terminal and moving all the traffic up to Mukilteo, seeing that the state legislature does not want to invest too much money in Edmonds and is dropping a lot of money in Mukilteo?
So the question is whether there's consideration of eliminating the Edmonds ferry terminal altogether. I'm not sure that that's something we're able to answer.
I've not heard of that. I've also heard that the Edmonds terminal is one of the backbones of the system that they built it around, being a connection, the northernmost connection.
I understand that's the extension of SR 104.
Ian, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I'd be happy to chat afterward. I can tell you that what I know about the Edmonds route is it is one of our core routes. It's also our busiest route for freight.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's somewhat of a comment and I think a question posed to the representative from BNSF.
We would like to hear the question.
Okay. Well, it comes with a comment because all 7 of the operation alternatives that were presented, the majority of which came from citizens, did not come from the consultant team. All of those have been X'd off. They are not in play except one, and then another piece. So the first one is the second track, which is shown as in construction. What is the review approval process by the city of Edmonds for their work in our city? The second is to you, sir, will you go back to BNSF and say that there is a proposal from the city to stop all train traffic when the city needs emergency access, to stop the traffic, to shut down the money machine and provide for life safety? Will you tell BNSF that the city is going to be united on that, and tell us your answer?
BNSF
Repeat the
has
question.
considered all proposals and will continue to consider all proposals.
But that's,
I think this is a question for discussion after Q&A session. I think this is outside of the realm of this study.
well, it's a proposal that's on the table that you presented, and it's like we're asking permission. You know, we have to get permission to do something on the railroad property, but the railroad doesn't seem to have to ask permission to do something within our city. And that's
So
a culture,
Is
that's
the
a culture
question
question.
about BNSF's role
Responsibility.
in the study, the jurisdiction that they have and their role in the study?
Responsibility.
There with the lantern.
The question is about responsibility of BNSF in the study. Rick, do you want to answer that one?
I already did.
Perhaps.
I mean, we're happy, again, we look at all proposals. We look at all on this, and it doesn't make any difference what community it comes from. We consider all proposals. That's the best we can do.
And I will say, as far as stopping the trains during an emergency call, that is one of the recommendations that Burlington Northern has said they will work with the city on. That's the 1 out of the 8 that we've had in the railroad category. Understand?
Any other clarifying questions about our presentation?
Again, I'll apologize. You didn't see my latest and greatest. Must be somewhere else on the flash drive.
That was not my responsibility.
We are, so we have another hour here to kibitz with you. We'll be around looking at, standing by on these alternatives. We'll be back by the displays in the back which summarize level 1 and also the criteria that are proposed for level 2. Again, we're in between level 1 and level 2. We'd like you to help us bake the cake.
And they couldn't get the
All right.
EMD.
So thanks again for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.